You're listening to Dramas Over Flowers with Saya, Anissa, and Borama. I'm Anissa.
I'm Borama, and today we have a very special guest.
So we have the extremely talented Frebi Krebsis. She is an expert on the Boys Over Flowers extended universe, which is a term I have coined, and now we're using it. And she actually convinced me to watch F4 Thailand with her amazing recaps.
Oh, amazing.
I thought I convinced you.
No, wait. We have to let Frebi say hi first. We're too excited. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Frebi. I used to call myself a Boys Over Flowers apologist, and now I've bumped myself up to a Boys Over Flowers scholar.
You absolutely are.
That's well deserved.
And I'm probably best known online for writing episode-by-episode recaps. Not all the episodes, because I was deep in my dissertation when F4 Thailand was coming out, but a fair amount of them that it was sufficient procrastination, so...
I feel that. And also they were brilliant recaps.
Thank you.
This is the kind of productive procrastination that I aspire to. Like, if I could write like that while I was procrastinating, that would be so amazing.
I kept telling myself, I need to stop at episode 4. I need to not write any more for this. I've got so many other things to do. And then I'd just be like, oh no, the episode's too rich. What am I going to do?
Oh, also, congratulations. I mean, did you finish your dissertation?
I did.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Despite all the drama.
Somehow got that done.
Amazing. So, I mean, I feel like this is something that we've been inevitably approaching since we started this podcast, just by virtue of our name. But it's been 5 years almost. And now we're finally talking about the Boys Over Flowers franchises.
Long overdue.
Yeah. The funny thing about the name of the podcast is that when we were looking for names for this podcast, because we had originally been, what were we? Stars in our pocket?
Stars in my pocket, yeah.
I remember that.
And then we were like, that's not quite on brand. Like, we need something that has literally drama in it. And I think Saya coined, or did you coin the name? Dramas Over Flowers became our name despite me being the only one who's watched Boys Over Flowers. Anissa being... No, wasn't it?
I watched Boys Over Flowers too.
Oh, I thought you abandoned it halfway through. Okay, no, wait, hold on. So Anissa was the one who had watched Hana, Yori, Dango and Boys Over Flowers. At that time...
I did abandon it halfway through, but I feel like that counts as watching it.
I don't think it counts as watching it. If you hadn't suffered through the second half, it doesn't count as watching Boys Over Flowers. And Saya hadn't watched any of it. So, and I was quite happy to have that be the name, because it was, I never really called myself a Boys Over Flowers apologist, but I may as well have been. Like, I could see all of the problems, and I think I watched it thrice. Not all the way through, but because the second half does get very painful, so you fast forward through a lot of it. But especially the first 12 episodes, definitely.
The Korean version.
Watched it thrice. Hana, Yori, Dango, watched twice. It's, I completely understand Anissa's love for it. And Anissa's going to give us, like, her thoughts on this entire series. This was my story. Anissa, go.
Yeah, no, I mean, Hana, Yori, Dango was my first Asian drama.
Same.
So it's very special to me. Oh, no, wait. Okay, yeah, actually, I want to hear all about, like, your history with this franchise, too. But speaking of the name, Saya did come up with it. And I feel like not only was it so iconic for me as a property, because it was like sort of the thing that sparked my love of, East Asian dramas, but it was like, I feel like for 10 years, everyone I talked to about Korean dramas was like, oh yeah, I watched Boys Over Flowers. That was my gateway drama. And so even though, like, personally, the Korean version wasn't something that I enjoyed at all, I knew what a huge weight it had in the fandom. So when Saya came up with this name, I was like, yes, absolutely. This is a perfect name. Like, this is the name, right? Like, you hear it, and you're like, yeah. So Frebi, what's your relationship to this?
Well, it's really
franchise?
Interesting that you chose to call the podcast Dramas Over Flowers, because I think the thing is, even if you're ambivalent about it or you haven't watched it, everyone knows it. It's just that iconic.
Mm-hmm.
And it was my gateway drama as well. Like, I watched Japanese dramas long before I found Korean dramas. And so my first one was Hana, Yori, Dango. And I liked it enough to keep going. And, so I went through a bunch, and then I finally found my way to Boys Over Flowers, and again, liked it enough to keep going. And I think the more unique thing about it is that a lot of people will watch Boys Over Flowers, they'll be like, I like these tropes, there's something really special about this medium, and then keep going, and they'll sort of either forget about Boys Over Flowers or just kind of come to sort of hate it a little bit. I know a lot of people who do, and I think that's completely fair because there's a lot to hate. But at the same time, I keep coming back to it because I have this just fascination with it. I think, you've got the main tropes, you've got rich man, poor woman, enemies to lovers, things like that. And I'm sure anyone can name like at least 5 other dramas that just do all of those things better. And yet there's something about it that just keeps bringing people back to it, and it's constantly still being readapted. So I've seen 7 adaptations of the manga, 6 of the official ones, and 1 unofficial one. Oh, and then also a sequel. So...
Wow. Okay.
Can you list those for us? Would you mind listing those for us?
Okay, so there's Hana Dango 2005, the Japanese series. I've also seen the 1995 Japanese film, which is horrible. Don't watch it. It's on YouTube, but don't watch it. I've seen the Korean version, Boys Over Flowers. I have seen Meteor Garden 2018. I couldn't stand it.
Me neither. I had to stop. It was just
horrendous.
No, why?
I understand why people loved it, because there were things to love in there, but it was just so...
Sure, but it was still toxic, and they tried to sanitize it, and neither worked.
No, and it was so bloated as well. It felt like it was sort of worshipping the original manga. It was like, we're going to adapt everything. But there's plenty in the manga that can be cut out. And there's also plenty that just doesn't stand up to today's standards. And you'd think a show that came out in 2018, it should understand that this manga that was written in the 90s isn't going to be appropriate to adapt word for word in today's climate. Like, it's not good for like young girls, and it's unpleasant to watch, scenes of like sexual violence, for instance, on today's TV, used as like this medium to bring a couple together. It's just unpleasant. So I didn't like that one. I've also seen Let's Go Watch the Meteor Shower, which is the unofficial Chinese drama version, and they think they literally called it unofficial because they just didn't get the rights to the manga, but they wanted to adapt it anyway. And that one's actually pretty good. Long, but good.
I never heard of that one.
Now that I'm listing all of these, I realise I'm ambivalent to a lot of them. And yet still fascinated for some reason.
So I have a question. Did you read the manga first? Because I read the manga first, and that's actually how I discovered, so I remember, I think it was like 2007, 2008. I was reading the Inuyasha manga, and then I got into the Inuyasha anime, and then like I was looking for, and I was just going through like a period where I was reading a lot of shoujo manga, and so I started reading Hana Dango, and then I was like, oh, is there an anime for this? And this is like 2007, 8 internet. Like I found like maybe one sort of distorted like video player that was like stretching the video in a weird way for
pixelated 4:3.
Yeah, 1995 anime, and I was like, and the animation was terrible. But then I found out that there had been a drama, so I watched the drama, and I don't think that I think I was disturbed by a lot of the things that I saw in the manga, but like there's something about watching things in looking at things in a comic that kind of dilutes how disturbing they are. I think, like, especially like manga is so over exaggerated that I don't think like it hit me. Some of the things I was like, whoa, this is bad, but then the Japanese live action adaptation was, it gets rid of a lot of that stuff.
It does.
So it was like a story that I already enjoyed, but it was such a good adaptation. And then, so that I loved it from the beginning. But when did you read the manga? Because I see from your recaps that you have read it.
Yes, no, I haven't read all of it. I read a fair portion of it. I actually read it after finding the anime. I was really into anime, but specifically like shoujo romance anime around 2012. And I found it, I came across it, I watched most of the anime, and I was like, I don't like this. I was at that point familiar with all of the cliches, and I was like, I don't like any of the characters, I don't understand why they're drawn to each other, they've got no chemistry. I watched the whole anime, and then when I stumbled upon the fact that they had a live action drama, I was like, well, I know this story. I'll give it a go. And I did. And the thing about Hana Yori Dango is that, yes, it changes a lot of it. And I think that was probably enough that I was like, oh, I'm actually very much enjoying this version, and I've enjoyed it more and more in every rewatch since.
It does really stand up to a rewatch.
It does. I think part of my fascination with this story is that despite the fact that it uses all of these tropes, and I don't think uses them as efficiently as things have since, it's got a lot of untapped potential just in the premise, because the premise is, which we haven't said it yet, not that it's very likely that a lot of people don't know, but the premise is obviously that there's this rich boy, he's a bully, he's sort of coded as, very, unchangeable, evil, almost villainous, and this girl comes along and she, I don't know, quote unquote fixes him, but there's potential in there for this to be a really powerful story about redemption and forgiveness and the transformative power of love. And it's the versions that tap into that have really sort of caught my attention.
From Jackie Lau, the author of Do Not Fall in Love, comes a perfect summer love story set in the forested paradise of Canadian cottage country that asks the question, can love beat the odds when the odds are two mothers dead set against it? Leora and Neil are both from Toronto, both Asian, and their moms are best friends. You'd think their parents would be trying madly to set them up, in typical Asian auntie style, but instead it's the opposite. Leora's single mom has always taught her not to believe in fairy tales, and that she doesn't need a man to be happy. When their families vacation together and she meets Neil for the first time in a decade, she's shocked to find out he's handsome and useful to have around the cottage. But are their moms trying to sabotage this budding relationship? Perfect for fans of Helen Huang's The Bride Test and The Donut Trap by Julie Tu, The Unmatchmakers is a forced proximity, friends to lovers rom-com that explores finding the balance of meeting expectations and being true to yourself, and how the best intentions can sometimes backfire. If you're noticing a donut theme, references to Tim Hortons and Coffee Crisp abound because Jackie is from my own hometown of Toronto. Click the link in the description to find out more about The Unmatchmakers by Jackie Lau.
So before we get into kind of the larger implications of the Boys Over Flowers extended universe, let's talk about F4 Thailand.
Yeah! Oh, where to begin?
So what's unique about this version? Because I feel like when I watched this, a lot of things came back to me, but it's been so long since I've, seen any other version of this that like some of the details were kind of hazy. And I have to admit, like when I was reading your recaps, I was like, oh yeah, they did change this. So like what's unique or like what's different to you about this version?
I mean, naturally, like little things are changed here and there because that's always the case with adapting something. But I find most interesting that they've attempted to adapt it for like a sort of modern audience, and I don't necessarily mean in the fact that they've incorporated social media, but it's more that they're sort of dealing with the I don't want political climate of today. I was speaking to someone, an online friend who is Thai, and I was talking about the fact that they deal with power and corruption. And how the red card kind of becomes a metaphor for who has the power in any situation, these kinds of things, which I think the drama really sort of taps into. And she said that she thinks that they're reflecting the political state in Thailand at the moment. And I found that so interesting that they're sort of taking this story and they're pulling it more towards a critique of capitalism and power and how violence and power come together. And it's just all very interesting from that perspective.
And the way that corporations function and how they affect the lives of ordinary poor people,
Yes.
which like I don't think any other adaptation has done. I mean, I haven't watched all of them, but that was something that really surprised me. And then I was thinking, well, if you're making it like 15, 20, 30 years later after the original, people aren't going to accept this sort of glamorization of extreme wealth without consequences that they did in like 2005, 2009, even 10 years ago.
Exactly.
Right?
And it's everywhere all over this version, even from the fact that when Time is trying to coerce other people into, bullying Goria, and, they push back every now and then. They're like, why? Why do I have to do this? And I think it sort of comes to a head sort of episode 11-ish when Thyme actually goes to his previous victims who he's harassed to the point where they've left school, or even worse in some instances, and he goes and apologizes to all of them. And this kind of accountability just isn't present in other versions of the story. And I remember the online response to it, because that's the joy of watching this live, I think. Twitter just went wild, and they were so happy with this development. And it makes you think that this is probably why the story is still so prevalent. I think people wanted this, and they've wanted it for a long time.
Did you watch it live too, Parma?
I did watch it live, yeah. For me, that particular moment, I could understand why that was so important for his redemption arc, but I found... So his apology to all of his victims, that was pretty great. But the moment that really worked for me was when he blocked the entrance to the stadium where all of the bullying would happen. And he gave this speech. And it was like this rousing monologue. And amazing, the best speech in the drama, probably. It was just so emotional, so from his heart, and something that none of the previous versions of Thyme's character was capable of doing. Like, none of them were, shall I say, smart enough or eloquent enough or in touch with their... just self-aware enough to make that speech. I was so impressed by that scene, just the entire construction of it.
I agree.
I'll touch on the apology thing a bit later, but that for me was the best moment and the thing that really set this drama apart. One other thing is, of course, the director, as soon as he came on board for this project, you could I went back and listened to a lot of his interviews, because Twitter was also obsessed with this director's interviews. They were I saw a lot of clips of his interviews, right? And this guy was so intentional in deconstructing a lot of the toxic messages that was sort of woven into previous versions of this story. And he was very clever about it. Somehow he managed to keep the craziness of this story and all of the masala of it, of everything spicy was still in there, but it wasn't painful, and it didn't make you feel guilty to watch it. In many ways, it was yes, this is the version we wanted of this trope. Why did you make it so awful before?
It just strikes this really beautiful balance between it's still, the Boys Over Flowers story, but it's taking all of the elements and just making them richer, and it's just beautiful. I mean, I remember one of his interviews, or I think it was just one of his tweets, but he was talking about, in episode 5, I think, when Gordia and Thyme go on that date, and they buy a honey badger toy. The honey badger is supposed to be a metaphor, well, it's supposed to be a personification representation of Thyme, and the fact that he's, beastly, even though he, looks quite cute, there's something rough and intense about him. And this show is just so interested in dissecting that and getting to the root of his character. And I love what you said about the scene where he blocks up that abandoned gym, because I think the abandoned gym is sort of the best new symbol that the show introduces, because there's so many symbols within this story. You've got the necklace and gosh, what else?
The meteor shower.
The meteor shower, strong weeds, things like that. There's just so many little symbols like that. And I think the gym is a really interesting one that they've introduced, because at the beginning it's this hub of sort of violence and ugliness within this school that's otherwise very beautiful and pristine, but it's falling down, it's dilapidated, and it's where they take their victims away from all the cameras and the onlookers. And then he boards it up as if to say, I'm no more of this. I'm putting an end to it. And then Tally later comes along and unboards it as if he's bringing back up, because he's determined to get his revenge, bring ugliness back into the school that Thyme is now trying to cleanse. And then by the end, it's just this repurposed space where they have that prom, and it's a community space for all of them together, which kind of shows all the healing that's taken place. I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of this version.
That's true. But something else that I really like about the second life of the stadium, which was the time after the boarding happened, like after the boarding was taken off, was because, well, Time now wants that shut up, because it's kind of like, oh, I did a bad deed, I feel horrible about it, but let's now like shut that thing up, put it away, and like never talk about it again. But you don't deal with trauma like that, right? So I didn't think about it initially, but later on it's occurred to me that this guy coming back in, who has a deep connection with one of F4's victims, and saying, no, we have to like bring this to light, was just, and it was so beautifully done through the metaphor of him taking the boats off. So it was just, this drama is like full of stuff you can, and just, it was,
and it wasn't over because Time and F4 wanted it to be over. It was over when, he actually tried to make reparations for what he did and sort of, gain forgiveness from the people that he had wronged. That's when it was allowed to be over. So I think, like, to go back to what you were saying earlier, Barma, about him being more self-aware, I don't think that in any other version that I've seen that he is actually, that he really reckons with who he was from, like, and I don't know, like, I think this version did the best job of making it not only that, like, because he fell in love with this extremely, courageous and morally upstanding person, for her, he became good. But in here, like, he's actually reckoning with who he was and why that was a wrong way to be. And, like, he changes who he is, like, maybe partly for her, maybe in the beginning, but, like, ultimately it's for himself. Yeah. And I don't think that I saw that in any other version done this well.
Absolutely, which is why I love this scriptwriter and this director, because they saw the potential in the story and brought it to fulfillment, because it was always there. It was always surprising to me that in this story structure, you have this central male character who's so like full of power and like drunk on his own power. And he has 3 really loyal friends who are relatively a lot more sensible and balanced and aren't apparently bullies. So how is it that this guy does horrible stuff and keeps getting away with it? One thing I really liked about how the story structured the whole bullying dynamic is that the F4 weren't really the main bullies. They were the one who created the opportunity for bullying. It was the school in its entirety participating in bullying. So it's like a commentary on how if people in power create a toxic society that like rewards horrible behavior and bullying, basically, it will keep happening. And they would almost like a lot of people would participate in it, believing that if they didn't participate in it, they would be targeted. And that was beautifully brought out in here. And I don't understand now why the previous versions never did it.
I think with that instance, it was kind of alluded to in other versions, but like for instance the fact that the red card is kind of this symbol of power, and of course to begin with it's entirely Time's. It's his power to like throw at people wherever he wants to, and then once he decides that he doesn't want to use that power anymore, he's just like, no more red card, and he expects everyone to follow along with him. But he's created the opportunity for other people, if they just use the card, to then seize his power, as the power goes to whoever is willing to sort of invoke that kind of destruction on other people, and it's constantly used against Gordia in the show, I've forgotten her name, but the girl Gordia befriends at the beginning,
Hana.
Yes, Hana. She uses the red card to get revenge, and then later on Talia does the same thing. The card kind of becomes its own entity, which I think makes it scarier in this version than in the others. Of course, the same plot points happened, but there was more emphasis on what it meant in this version than in others.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the scriptwriter and the director. I think the dialogue was so well written here, like maybe the best dialogue from this franchise that I've seen. And also the directing and the cinematography, just like, gorgeous, but then also like, just as you said, so intentional, so like you could just tell how much thought they put into, like, with every episode you were just like, wow, they really thought about this, like they and that makes it, and it's like somehow feels grounded and fantastical at the same time, which is really hard to pull off. Like, and it does, and it's also terrifying for that reason, right? Like you said, Frabby, like I think I found this version of Thyme's mother, like Domyoji's mother, like the most terrifying of all of the mothers.
Absolutely.
Because there's nothing ridiculous about her.
Mhm.
She is just stone cold, like power and will. And it's like there's those scenes where I wanted to bring this up too, that like in a way there's a lot of misogynistic tropes in this story, but also it can be a story, like it has the potential to be a story about like a lot of strong women.
That's true.
With a lot of agency, and you have these great characters like Tia in this version, the older sister. You have Mira in the beginning. You have both of their mothers, who are like, when they face down against, like when her mother tells her off and like throws that water in her face, I was like, yeah, oh no, it's fish sauce, right? Even better. but like I found some of the most powerful scenes were with Goria basically telling Rosalind where to stick it, and I was like, yes.
That's a really good point, because like I think the power struggle between Thyme and his mother is really sort of amped up in this version compared to other ones, because there's always been that tension there between them, because he feels unloved, he feels uncared for, and that's why he ends up becoming the person that he is. And it's the heroine's love that undoes that. But in this version as well, you get this sense that the reason that Thyme is the way he is because his mother's taught him to be that way. You have the scene right at the beginning where Rosalind is talking about the whole red card system. She's like, someone's acting out, you've got to give them a red card. And you can see there how the way that Thyme acts is directly inherited from her, and you have to stop this cycle in order to break it and make society a little bit better. I love what you said about this franchise, because I've always found it really interesting. For every sort of one-dimensional girl who decides to, she's going to wreak havoc and harm the heroine and try and get the hero, there's so many others that are actually surprisingly strong and interesting and well developed. Lita in this instance, but that character in all of the iterations is always so interesting, because you tend to find with older stories that like female second leads are always a specific type, and she kind of breaks out of that type by always being far more nuanced than other versions are. She wants to marry the hero, but she also loves the heroine, and she's not ever evil, she's just in love and occasionally misguided, and it's just so much more interesting than a lot of other versions that have come out since are. And that's one of those
and she's just such a charming character. Like, she's just such a charming character. Yeah. Like, even, I know we rag on Yoko Kamio a lot, the manga writer, but like, even in the manga, she was a great character. Like, she was one of my favorite characters. I was like, this girl.
She's just vibrant her own, and lovable.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But I think she was kind of planned as like the female version of Thyme, and that's always come across. Like, I forget the girl's name in the original manga, but
Tsukushi.
Tsukushi was definitely like Domyoji's exact, like almost an exact mirror. In the way she acted, the way she had been brought up, in the way she reacted to situations. No?
What was her name? It wasn't Tsukushi. I'm talking about the heroine. The name of the character was Shigeru. Sorry about that.
Okay. So in my mind, she's always been like a bit of a mirror. But I thought Lita did it best. Or maybe there was something about Thyme and Lita that just worked the best, in that they were both such children, but also like more mature than teenagers should be. And also like had too much power, didn't know what to do with it, came out in all the wrong ways. Yeah, they could basically be siblings.
And this version played with that a little bit with Gordia and Tale as well. There was that whole episode where you had the Gordia Tale pairing and then the Lita Thyme pairing being contrasted, as if to say, well, maybe these two couples should just be together, because Gordia and Tale are both hardworking, what's the phrase?
They know each other's worlds. Like, they didn't have to explain anything to each other. Mm-hmm. So it was easier in a lot of ways. I really also enjoyed that situation where you have Thyme basically buying a house in front of hers to stay in her neighborhood. That was just that was so excellent. Has that been done in other versions? I don't remember it being done in Boys Over Flowers, at least.
He did it in Hana, Yori, Dango,
yes, yeah.
And it's in the manga as well.
Okay. I don't remember this but in the Korean version, but maybe it was there as well. It's been a while since I've watched it. But I just found that it felt like an extended period of getting to understand her world, which I honestly don't think they put this much time into him understanding her world quite in the same way in the other dramas. And it wasn't just a matter of him staying one evening with her family and living in the cramped spaces and eating the family food and suddenly having empathy. It wasn't that, which is how the other dramas seem to do it. He really understood. He was helping her take care of her brother on a daily basis. Like, the boy was trying so hard, and it came from a genuine space, and that really came across, which is very surprising given how short this drama was compared to how long every other version seemed to be.
I mean, I think that was one of my complaints about Boys Over. I mean, I had many complaints, but one of my complaints about Boys Over Flowers, the Korean version, was just how it just fetishized wealth to a point where it could no longer critique it. Whereas, in Hana, Yori, Dango, like, there are scenes where she's like, how dare you? Like, you've never earned a single penny on your own in your life. Like, that's the kind of stuff that she throws in his face. Like, you're a useless person. You're just rich and you inherited all. Like, what do you even do? Like, what are you good for? And then he has to, like, be like, oh, what am I good for? I'm good for loving you.
This I do remember. I thought Matsumoto was just, like, so perfectly cast for this.
Oh, he was wonderful.
Yes. Oh my God. I just went back and watched a clip of the two of them, and I was just like, I love these two so much. Anyway, sorry.
I think that's... Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go on.
Okay. I think that's one of the things that's very romantic about this version with F4 Thailand, is that there's this focus on the fact that, although it may be easier for him to marry Lita, and it wouldn't be a bad marriage either because they'd get along well because they're very similar people, that ease isn't what he wants. He wants Claudia, but it's not that he wants her. He doesn't want to, like, possess her. He wants to understand her. Like the stairway scene in episode 4, where they're just chatting to each other. And in other versions, they were having, it wasn't quite like this. This version is all about them just coming to know the sort of intimate details of each other's lives. They just share, how many siblings they have and what their home lives are like, and these like little minor things that just show that they're trying to get to know each other on a level that's deeper and goes more towards like understanding.
I loved
empathy.
Yeah, I loved this. You were talking about symbols earlier, Frabby, like the magic pork.
Yes.
Like when he comes to her house and there's like the last piece of meat, and they tell him about this like little silly and cute tradition they have, and he's just like, his mind is blown because he's never had a communal meal with his family that was that warm and nice, even though, so like, you're right, like they enter into each other's worlds and it's not always pleasant, but there is like a real effort to do that. And I do think that Hana Yori Dango did that a little bit,
yes.
but I don't think it did it as well as it. I mean, he does, he moves into her apartment building. He tries to understand her life. He begins to understand how different, how privileged he is, but it doesn't really go that far the way that this one does, I think.
Yeah. The other thing that I really liked was that whole undoing of what that section of the story about her being a maid in his house was in this version, because in this version it was just hilarious. But in other versions there was a certain amount of like it's hard to explain, but I think somebody on Twitter said this really well. I don't know if you remember the discussion at that point, Fabi, but it was basically about a difference between male and female gaze. And in F4 somehow she was never dressed in a way that would seem provocative or playing into the male fantasy of, the maid with her duster, that very...
That's true.
Right? And I really, it didn't occur to me before I read those threads. And I was like, that's true. At no point am I feeling like this is being even remotely fetishized. And this is not a time where they are going to have like awkward intimacies. I mean, yeah, his teenage boy mind goes in every direction, but it's always like he ends up getting a duster in his face for all of those efforts. But it remains very I don't know. It's a time for her to get to know his world, and it kind of felt like the flip side of what he was doing for her before. Except, of course, Korea didn't really want to be in his house dusting the place. But I mean, okay, fair enough. Whatever. The setup is the same, but. Am I making sense?
No, because I cringed. Like, at that point, I always cringe, and I'm just like, no, did they have to do this? But then you're right, they did it. Sorry, Frabby, you look like you have to say something.
Oh, I don't know. There definitely is more fetishization in the Korean version. I remember all of these fantasy sequences where Junpyo is just like, oh, and then she'll come into my room and she'll wake me up gently and all of this, and it's just a lot.
Okay, I didn't get to that point, so I'm.
Oh yeah, it's uncomfortable, and there's just not that here. And I like what you said about her also trying to get to know his world, because I feel like there's less of that in every other version. Because there's that whole episode with the funeral where Gordio's just helping to prepare it.
Oh, I love that.
Yes.
Oh my
That was
God, I
so
love that so
good.
much.
That was so good.
He's just helping to prepare it, but time has to be there. He has to be on. He has to socialize with people, because it's not just a funeral. It's also to do with business. And she's looking at this and she can barely recognize him. And that's one of the moments where she's just like, our worlds might be too difficult to reconcile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At that point, he is like beside Lita, and she could see how easily they fit together, and how him as the son of this business mogul in this world of people who are gathering together at the death of another businessman, it's just this totally different culture, and she cannot relate. And the great thing about the direction of this story is that the audience couldn't relate either. It was actually done in a really it was done in a really fancy scale, but not like. Okay, and here I have to talk about the production quality of this thing, because Boys Over Flowers, when they tried to do rich, they went garish. But when F4 tried to do rich, this was rich. This was rich people.
I wrote this in my notes. I'm like, this is how actual rich people are, instead of, like Boys Over Flowers fantasy of how, because you're right. Like, extremely wealthy people are very low key because they think it's trashy to, exactly, to like be extremely, ostentatious about their wealth. Like, that's like real, like old money. I mean, because they don't need to, right? They have so much power that they don't need to do any of
It's all
that.
about
And this
class.
was, so I was like, exactly. Yeah. It is almost like, it almost becomes caste, actually, rather than class, right? Because it goes so deep and it's been around for so long. And that's kind of the way that, they treat Goria, like his family and that class of people, as if she is born into a different caste and she could never escape from that. And so just in her essence, she's below them, and that's, I think in a lot of societies, class does function as caste. In our, in our current
absolutely
moment,
most societies, I think it kind of functionally makes you less, and then it makes you feel less, and it's like it's horrible to break upwards through that kind of calcified strata. But like we were talking about the scale of things, like how let's say Boys Over Flowers was trying to show the rich world of Go Junpyo. Wait, did I say his name right?
Yes.
And the way they did it was, you guys remember when he and his blonde violin bestie had like a fallout over Jandi, and they had like car racing and like these real weird.
Oh my God, it was so cringy.
Right. Okay. So I hated that so much. And they just didn't do that stuff here. First of all, because these four boys are actual real friends, and they don't do stupid stuff like that. And also, they never needed to do. Yeah. They didn't need to do all of that to show how like rich and like what the class difference that this world has. Just again comes down to how good the direction was here.
Yeah, no, the details were so carefully thought out in every sense. Can we talk about, because you said like that they're genuine friends, and I think this is the best friendship that we've seen between F4 in any version. Like they actually
absolutely
care about each other. They're not just like fancy dolls that are like set up next to each other, in the most attractive placement. Like MJ, I loved him so much.
MJ.
MJ is the real MVP.
I love that man. I've said it in one of my posts that I always find myself surprisingly fixated on the fourth member, simply because I get the impression that Yoko Kamiya was like, okay, I want to make a quartet of people, so I'm going to do one who's like rough around the edges, but heart of gold. I'm going to do one that's like very beautiful, very aloof. I'm going to do one who's like a total playboy, and then
the fourth one.
and then the fourth one. And, you get the impression that she's basically just written, what is his name? She's written the third one twice. She's like a playboy again, but this time he likes older women. Like, that's...
And he's from a gangster family.
Like, those are his only personality traits. And this drama actually tried to do something with him, which I liked. It was subtle, but, he was very much all about his friends. He cared about their bonds, arguably the most out of all of them.
He was the glue that kept the group from kind of fracturing at those critical moments when things were getting bad.
And he got his own weird little PPL side story, which I loved. I loved that so much.
I cannot believe that they actually did that whole thing and they really went there. Yes, but it was an arc and everything.
Wow, why wasn't PPL? Why wasn't it part of the main story?
You gotta get that tasty KFC money. Come on.
But I actually skipped the first two epilogues. So I had to go back and watch them because I didn't know I was missing out on such a huge thing.
I couldn't tell whether I actually loved it or I just loved laughing at it. I think by the end I genuinely loved it by the end a little bit, but just the bit near the end where, the breakup happened and then he was like, and then I never ate KFC again. I was hysterical. I was hysterical.
That's so funny, oh my god. And they're just sitting there eating a burger in sadness. And then there's this big focus on the zinger.
I loved it. It was, I thought to myself, if you're going to do PPL and you have to, do it like that. Like, do you remember Be Melodramatic, where there was that whole segment, that whole cutaway for the PPL?
That was the best.
If you have to do it, make it fun.
Agreed.
People need to take notes.
Even in the drama, it was extremely obvious. Every time they brought in that fat shaming 0-calorie yogurt, it was like a whole just that right turn to it'll keep you slim, eat it. And I was just like, wow, they're really
apparently just PPL is like this in Thai dramas.
The viewers know we have to do this. Yeah, they everyone's on board. We're like, okay, this is the price we have to pay for the content that we love. It's okay.
Oh, but back to the boys.
Yes.
What I liked about this version is that Hana, Yori, Dango did the same thing, where in the first 2 episodes or so, as F4 are introduced, they're cold. They suck the air out of the room. They're very intimidating. There's a lot of tension. And then by the time that accidental kiss happens with Gordio and Thyme, just complete total tone change where suddenly it's they're just stupid boys. They're just mixed up boys. They're all dumb and they're best friends. And I love that so much, where it's just that moment is where Gordio for the first time sees them as actual people. And not just these Goliaths to overcome. And that is the sort of first moment that's necessary in order to break the boundaries between all of them.
And once they let her in, that's it. She's in now. She knows them and they are their kind of real selves in front of her. So, yeah.
It's delightful.
I also really felt, in other versions, they will always say Rui and Tsukasa are best friends, whatever. And I didn't really feel it. I felt it a little bit in the Japanese version, there is that whole moment at the airport and with the apple and I'll never forget that apple.
God, that was cute though.
I got that. That got me. But in general, across the seasons, I didn't get the same. Yeah, there were some great moments, but you were these two are best friends.
How?
Is this just how rich people have best friends? It's I couldn't relate to it. But in this one, you felt that, even the pettiness was very real.
Agreed. But also with Hana, Yori, Dango, I think it was simply that Domyoji's break, during that airport scene, it was Domyoji getting suddenly emotional that made you think, oh, he has real affection for his friend. But not Rui's reaction. I mean, that was not, like, I got nothing from him. But in this version, let me check the boy's name, Ren. In this version, Ren, like, genuinely seemed like a support system for Thyme. Like, once they had figured out their issues over Korea, and Ren burst out laughing, and they had, like, their, mock fight, whatever. It was like he is a genuine friend to Thyme, and Thyme was genuinely miserable not being friends with him. And that was so apparent in the story. I love that.
About Ren, I do always kind of hate him for a large portion of the story in most versions.
I'm glad I'm not
and
the
I
only one.
feel like, okay, yes, like this is the first time where I wasn't just like, why are you such a passive a-hole? And like, you're like, he kind of would always kind of sit in the background and like quietly manipulate everyone to his own sort of, and and he does that in this one too. Like in the beginning, he knows exactly how Goria feels, and he kind of uses her feelings, or he doesn't really. He has his own stuff going on, and he doesn't really care too much if he's hurting her. But then, like, as the story goes, you see his kind of, he starts to use his observational qualities for good instead of just using them to kind of do his own thing and still end up looking like a good guy. Like, that's his whole thing, right? Like, he's able to present himself as this noble dude whilst not really being a great dude, like in most of the versions.
This is
and
exactly
you actually
my
saw
problem.
him. Yes. And everyone's just like, he's so, like dreamy. And I'm like, no, he's terrible.
He has to do the bare minimum of kindness, and he's already better than Thyme. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Like,
right. Exactly.
when he's actually just not that decent. He just is literally doing the bare minimum. And this is true in all versions.
And he's very selfish.
He's very selfish.
Very selfish.
Yeah. He only thinks about himself and about Mira, or, the original person he was in love with in every story. And he does improve by the end, but I struggle to, get on board with the second lead train.
Improves, he is utterly boring. Like, he has no character, like, arc left. But with Ren, that just doesn't happen. He stays present and relevant and kind of fun and interesting. Like, and he has interesting things to say. As Anisa put it, he uses his observational skills to really good use. Like, he puts them to good use.
I think in like sort of most versions of this story, he's supposed to be a cold guy who's not really bad, but he never really had a reason to like take action, or he never felt motivated to take action on anything until he meets Sakushi. And then he kind of was like, oh, well, actually now I'm going to, put my money where my mouth is a little bit. But like, and then later on in the story, then he becomes sort of like a moral conscience for the hero. And I didn't find that worked for me in any other version, because I was like, who are you to be a moral like, A, you don't even seem like real friends, and B, like, why are you, like, he just seemed judgmental, and like he was, pretending like he had this moral high ground when he really didn't. But in this one, like in that scene where he comes into Thyme's office and is like, I found Goria and here's where she is, and you need to like wake up and realize that she didn't actually take the money, because like, why would she, like he kind of gives him that wake up call, and he does kind of play that role of his, like his conscience. But it works here because they have the kind of relationship where they do that. And Thyme has done that for him in the past when he was being a butt about Mira. He was like, get your head out of your butt and like wake up to the fact that like, you need to move on with your life and stop moping, whatever. So like that actually really worked for me, in this version, which it hasn't in the previous versions.
I disagree only in that I don't think that Ren had a lot to do in the middle of the story this time. I think the second that his whole thing with Goria was resolved in like episode 7, he was just kind of there. But then I agree that he came in a really beautiful way at the end, where like he'd been there the whole time, and he'd been this careful supporter, and he'd been like this consistent friend to Goria and Thyme. And then that worked in the end because he had the genuine interest in reuniting them. He didn't have any of his own agendas in this version. He didn't really come back into the love triangle in any significant way in this version, whereas other ones ramped it up at this point.
I think which is why we liked him in this version.
It worked for me. Yeah, it worked for me that we just had that one scene where he kind of knew that she was going to say no, but he was like, you know what? I'm just going to tell her. He went for it. He took his rejection like a woman very well. And then they moved on, and he was like, okay, now we're just friends.
It was beautiful,
That was good.
It was just, there was so much, not delicacy, humility about him in this version.
This has a lot of emotional intelligence, this story.
Agreed.
It's beautiful.
Agreed.
Yeah, I completely agree.
There is this one scene, I'm going back to the romantic pairing for a second, between Thyme and Goria that I think they completely deleted in this version, which I appreciated. Do you guys remember, I think in Meteor Shower, they made it way worse, the 2018 version, where Dylan kind of corners Goria's, like, I forget the, Shanchai. So, so Mingshi kind of like corners her and like on the rooftop, he's really jealous and he screams at her face and he kind of like pushes her against the wall and he's basically doing this aggressive dominance thing and she genuinely freaks out. This moment is present there in Boys Over Flowers. It's also present in Hana, Yori, Dango. Not as bad as this. This was the worst version, the Meteor Garden 2018 version. And I remember it being the worst version because that's when I checked out. Mm-hmm. That thing happened. And after that, it went downhill. I pretty much stopped watching a couple episodes after that. Editor's note. I didn't do a very good job of explaining the scene in Meteor Garden and why it disturbed me so much. But after the recording, I went back and rewatched a clip of that scene. I'm putting the link to it in the description below. However, trigger warning. And I'm going to describe this scene here. And here's the thing. It's sexual violence. He corners her on the rooftop. I had like blanked this scene out in my head. He corners her on the rooftop. Yes, he's extremely jealous. He's yelling at her face. But what I forgot was he punched the wall next to her face, terrified the girl. She ran away. His hand is bleeding. He punched the wall so hard. He chases her down. She's fallen down and he yanks her up by the collar, pushes her against the wall. And while she's crying, he forces a kiss on her. She tries to escape. He yanks her back, forces another kiss on her, and this girl is trembling and weeping. It is the worst scene, guys. I don't know why they put it in. It's not remotely romantic. It's supposed to be violent. I am not. For reference, the link is below, but yeah, and so ending editor's note here. Just really thought it was important to actually explain what I was talking about before. And I don't know why they made it worse, because that is not the scene that you make worse. It was completely absent in this version. I don't remember it at all. I mean, I watched it a couple of months back. There's no way I would completely forget a moment like that. I don't think they had it. At no point. Yeah, go on.
Is one scene where he almost hits her.
Yes, that's
like he's about to hit her. Yeah. So he doesn't hit her, but he like raises his fist like this, and then he stops.
That's not the scene that I'm talking about. That scene is absolutely there.
Okay.
But I'm not talking about physical violence. I'm talking about sexual violence. That is what was threatened in the previous versions, and in F4, the violence that he threatens her with is like filled with rage and like. He thinks of like hitting her in a way he would think of hitting anybody else who was making him angry and not filled with like gendered violence. Do you know what I mean? And this is a very specific scene that always hits me hard because it's a dominance move that's made by men knowing that women are scared of sexual violence. I didn't find that scene in F4 at all. If I'm mistaken, like listeners tell me, but I don't think I'm mistaken. I don't think F4 had that scene.
Yes.
At no point does Thyme ever threaten Goria with sexual violence, not even momentarily, not even when he's explosively angry. It's always like, I will beat you up. But that's
not even via other like third parties, which is another one of my huge complaints about Boys Over Flowers. Sorry, Frabby, go ahead, because I know you wrote about this extensively, right?
There was that third-party situation that was present in F4, but it was done slightly differently.
But it wasn't specifically instigated and on his orders, which is how it was in Boys Over Flowers.
True, it was taken on by the boys themselves, thinking that they'll get kudos for their action.
Yeah, slight difference. I've written about this extensively, so I wrote something called The Boys Over Flowers Problem, which is where I was talking about that scene in Meteor Garden. Because it existed in the manga where he essentially threatened her with rape, and it's uncomfortable and it's horrible and you don't want to watch it. So I was like, what place does this have in the 2018 version? You know, why on earth are you still including this? And so when it was announced that F4 Thailand was coming out, I wrote this just to say, if you include this version, it has no place being here, and what you're arguing is going to be an updated version of the story. So I was dreading this part of the show when I was watching it the first time, and we got to episode 7, and then that sort of almost punch happened, and I was like, this is the equivalent they're going with this time. Okay. And it is significantly different because there isn't any threat of sexual violence here. But there is still violence. But obviously this is in the show, they're screaming, this is Thyme's lowest point. And after this, he's going to improve. And after that, you have the scene where he takes Gordia and he boards up the abandoned gym as if to say, no more. I've reached my low. This is not going to happen again. And he's never violent like that again.
Agreed. Absolutely. That was his lowest point. And as Prabi just said, there is a distinct difference between being a man-child and like feeling like everything is spinning out of your control and like being violent because you have no control over your own emotions and realizing what that makes you, which is why I said Thyme is like the most self-aware version of this character, and being Dylan's version in Meteor Garden, where that wasn't his lowest point. He has lower points after that. It was just a tantrum he throws at Shanchai because he's jealous that he thinks she's meeting somebody else or talking to somebody else on the rooftop, and she's trying to get away from him, like physically run away from him, and he grabs her and pushes her against the wall, and he's threatening her with violence. It's very clearly sexual violence that he's threatening her with, and she freaks the hell out, and he keeps on going. It's nowhere near comparable.
Scared, and she's crying. Like, it's
traumatic to watch. I'm never going to forget that.
No, honestly.
It's so bad.
And, after this, I remember there's a point in Meteor Garden where he goes, I'll never hurt her. And I'm like, dude, you already have. And just the rest of the time on the show, there's a lot of him dragging her around and her looking scared every time he's angry. And I just hate it.
That's the other thing. Thank you for pointing it out. So the other reason Meteor Garden didn't work for me at all was because Shanchai's character never really seemed to fall in love with Mingxi. It was like she was just scared out of her mind half the time, then very confused.
She's like a hostage in their relationship, but like...
Yeah, I mean, it's just then it just becomes like a romanticized abusive relationship. Then, like, what else are you doing?
Basically,
in that situation? Yeah,
because weirdly, I would say Dylan's version was a lot like Lee Min-ho's version in Boys Over Flowers. Like, there is a direct comparison to how their arcs worked and what their behavior was, whereas Thyme's version, like Bright's version, is a lot like Matsumoto's in Hana, Yori, Dango.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen Meteor Garden, but like that, what you're describing reminds me a lot of Gujinpyo.
This is why I was immediately so optimistic for this version, because the second the first episode came out, I was like, oh, they're tracing all the same steps as Hana, Yori, Dango. They were taking most of their influence from that, and that is what I think to be the best version and the healthiest version, and
that's why that's why I started watching it, because of what you said, because I remember Borma was like, I'm watching it, but then I also knew that Borma had enjoyed Boys Over Flowers.
Oh, sure, she didn't trust me. That's what she's saying.
No, but I was like, because I knew that you loved Hana Yori Dango so much, and that, like, you had said that it reminded you, that was what I was like, oh, if that's the case. Because I was like, why are we making this again in 2021?
It's just automatic praise, isn't it, if I say that it's like Hana Yori Dango, because even though it came out in 2005, it's just distinctively better than all the ones that have come out since.
100%.
Don't you guys think that all the other 18 and a half versions, I don't know how many came out, were like drafts, like first draft, second draft, third draft, and the writers should have just like struck them off, and like this was the final version that they should have like put out in the world.
Very expensive drafts.
I mean, you posed the idea, like, should this still be adapted now? And I would argue that in this instance, yes, because this felt like it would, like the others were posing a question and this was the answer. And now I'm like, we're good, we're done. we're finished.
Yeah. That's it. We don't need another version. Yeah. I like before I watched this, I would have said no, we don't need another version. Like Hana Yori Dango did it. And now I don't know, like I have such a strong emotional attachment to Hana Yori Dango that I don't know that I can say that I love this one more, but I think it is in almost every aspect objectively better.
Yeah. Hana Yori Dango is such a sentimental favourite for me as well. It's very beautiful and like electric in a way that I'd argue this version isn't, because it's so beautiful and polished. I don't know if you can always have both, but you know, this is so important because again it, you know, plays with accountability and redemption, like true redemption, in a way that the others didn't think to address.
Agree. I have a final question before we start wrapping up, which is that we, like, I don't know about society in general, but my heart generally tends to really like these types of heroes. Like, I am getting over them now, but in 10 years of drama watching regularly, I have gravitated towards heroes like this who are childish but arrogant, like drunk on power, also realizing something about themselves, all of those things. But like society at large really romanticizes this man-child, this rich man-child trope. And I was wondering, why is it that we are so comfortable watching this hero in various versions, but more specifically in this version, in the Hana Yori Dango extended universe, happen again and again and again, and we're always willing to come back to watch this guy because we are. I think he's pretty iconic. If you take this one guy out, it's not going to be the story anymore. So, what is it that allows us to keep coming back here, watch him do awful stuff, and come back again for the next version? And the only thing I could think of was, it's a theory I have, that we consider drama safe spaces, in that if we know that a character is a hero, we know that he can do horrible things, but at the end of the day, since he's a hero, we know there is a redemption arc in the work and that he will never cross a certain line. And for, you know, different characters, the line in different places. But
that's true.
But because it's a safe space, we really allow them to do really awful stuff. And we're still okay to come back for different versions. I mean, I'm still trying to process this and give myself like a good explanation to why this is a trope that keeps us coming back.
Right. That's kind of the core of our question as we approach this episode, right? Like, is why is this so popular? Why is it still so popular? Like, okay, it was popular in 1995. Why is it still so popular now? Like, I was watching, you know, sort of the internet explode around the time when F4 Thailand was airing, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this story still has so much power that, like, I agree with you, Borma, about that. And I also think that in a lot of ways, this is kind of the ultimate wish fulfillment. And it allows you to dream about a world where, I mean, part of me cringes saying this, but like that a good woman can actually change a bad man. And like, we know that's not true and it doesn't happen in real life. But when it's done well, it's not even about that like dynamic between a woman and a man. It's like this person who comes into this world that is so dark and so evil and where so many bad things are happening, and simply by the like, she has nothing. She doesn't have wealth, she doesn't have power, she doesn't have friends. All she has is the goodness of and the courage of herself, and she somehow triumphs over all of them. And that's like, I don't know, there's a lot of power in that, right? Mm-hmm. If it's done well, it makes you feel really good at the end. And like for a teenage girl, that's very powerful because you are on the bottom of the totem pole of a lot of things at that time in your life.
True. And remind me, guys, was the ending of the original Hana Yori Dango what I remember it to be? Because I always remember Goria's counterparts always ending up independent. Like they had their own careers at the end. Was that true of the original Hana Yori Dango too? I'm not remembering exactly what the ending was in the second season.
in Hana Yori Dango, there wasn't really a flash forward. It ended with that prom, which was then used in F4 Thailand, and the fact that Sakushi and Tsukasa were going to marry. So actually, we never really found out much about who she was going to be in the future.
Yeah, I
think he proposes in the last episode. And then, did you guys watch the movie?
Yes, I've seen the movie.
They get married in the movie.
Oh, that
was like the most fan servicey thing ever, and I loved every minute of it. But I want to hear Frabby's answer too about, like, do you agree? Do you have another theory about why it's so popular?
I can only speak for me, I suppose. But for me, it's that you don't really get any good substitute for like a really good character arc. I'm all about the dramatic, transformative character arc. Like my favourite drama is Shining Inheritance, which is a 2009 makjang. Just your classic Cinderella story, and no one knows about it. Everyone's forgotten about it, but the hero's character journey, Juan, is beautiful. Like, he starts so angry at the world, so useless.
This is also my sister's favorite. Will you come back and talk to us about Shining Inheritance?
Yes,
Robbie?
I will.
I want it. I've been waiting to talk to somebody about this.
Can
for
I be
years,
a part
other
of
than my
it?
sister?
Because Anissa got me started on watching it, and I think I'm definitely going to finish it pretty soon.
Incredible. Okay.
You're so right. Like, the redemption story, if it's done properly, it's
something.
I think it's one of those.
There's no substitution for it. It's just something completely unique, because we don't really believe that people like this can be redeemed in real life. And I think you're right in that dramas are this safe space, this fantasy in which this is possible. And it gives me hope for the world, like, for one thing. But it's also just so nice that, although it looks in this story like it's the heroine fixing the hero, I think in good versions, at least, it's actually that the heroine inspires the hero to want to be better. And I think that's beautiful.
She allows him to see a possibility that he never experienced in his life before. And then once he's seen it, that's it. He can't let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Not at any price, And I love that. And I think also, like, what you were saying, Borma, about especially in this version, like, he's so bad at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, he's so bad. And even in Shining Inheritance as well. Like, he's so bad in the beginning. And the thing about it is, in a drama, you have the space, right? Like, it's not a movie. You have enough space. You have enough time.
Yes, time.
And you have the sort of the multiple perspectives where, you can see like all these little moments that add up to a redemption, where you don't really have enough time to do that in like a 3-hour film, because it just won't be believable. But in here, you can make it believable if you do it well. And I think the reason that this is so polarizing is because, like, a redemption story done badly is just like excusing someone who did bad things, right? So it can go so wrong. Like, the balance is really, you have to really strike a fine balance, which, yeah, maybe that's why people have a lot of emotions around this franchise too.
I just love the audience reaction that I've seen to this show. If you were going on Twitter around this time, people were making up new hashtags like "Thank you F4 Thailand" and just talking about how touched they've been from the experience of watching it, and it's actually beautiful. Like, I haven't seen anything similar.
Agreed, absolutely. This drama was something special, and it was something special. There is one thing they could not fix, though. It's been bad in every version I've ever watched, which is the whole Kevin and Canning, whatever that was. That's always bad.
That.
I never liked them.
I haven't either, but I think this is better done than the other versions.
This was the best one. But I don't like the story in its essence. Like,
no.
It's just like, there's no way that story can be satisfying because of the position it puts her in. But I did actually like Kevin. Like, he's very, very likable.
Yeah, he is very, very likable.
Yes.
But his dynamic with Canning is just bad in every. At least he wasn't like obsessed with making tea in this version. I suppose there are some blessings.
He's obsessed with making garlands. I was like, how do you even know how to, like, why garlands? So would you all say that this is your favorite version?
Oh, I mean, it's really hard to choose between this and Hana Yori Dango.
Yeah.
I'm still deciding.
I feel the same way.
I've actually been planning on doing like a little written ranking of all the shows at some point, but it required me to watch all of them within like a similar time frame. So I don't know when that's going to happen. But I feel like this one,
R.I.P. your peace of mind.
For me, like on a very individual level, Domyoji is the best Domyoji. Like Matsumoto is the best Domyoji, but
I agree. Yes.
2 is the best Goria. Like she is the best. For me, this is the best version of her. But that makes sense, right? Given the changing in time, the female main character evolving to becoming somebody who's just so confident, like from within. Her previous versions weren't this confident. They just didn't have this solid core trust in her own abilities that Goria has.
That's
so
true.
For me, Goria is like the best version.
Even Tsukushi, like I adore Mao Inoue's version of the character, but she doesn't have a lot of faith in herself the way the others do. Like in Hana Yori Dango, there's this one arc where it's just them doing like a beauty pageant, and Tsukushi has to get involved because reasons.
Oh my god!
And you get that sense
and they didn't have that. They didn't have that in this version, right? Oh my god! Yes.
I feel it, and I also feel like she did have that in season 1, and then once they get together,
she loses
her
it.
insecurities.
Yeah,
like she just doesn't have the same fire in season 2, and which is why like I didn't like season 2 as much as I loved season 1.
It's difficult, but season 2 did have flavor of life, so compromises have to be made.
This is true. Oh, I have to say, as much as I think the direction and cinematography and production values of this F4 Thailand were really good, the music of Hana Yori Dango is always going to be in my heart. It's just so good.
It's a step above.
I don't think I can choose between them. They're just. I also feel like the last time I rewatched Hana Yori Dango was like 2015 or something. So I feel like I need to go back and watch again before I can make like a final decision. But I do think that Hana Yori Dango couple had the best chemistry.
I think I agree with that as well. There are so many versions that just had no chemistry, like Korean version.
Korean version had negative. Like I did not want them to be near each other.
Good son and Imino, just not the draw of that drama. I do think there were some pluses to it. Like I think that the soundtrack was cracky. I think that there were some arcs that were pretty fun.
The soundtrack was awful and yet earworms. I just don't know how they managed to do that. And guys, that was my first version. Okay, like of the Boys Over universe. That was my first version. So forgive me for like having some fondness for it, because when I did go on to watch Hana Yori Dango, I absolutely acknowledge it is superior, way by like 1,000 times. But still, like your first.
Yeah, of course.
There are draws.
You don't have to be forgiven for that. It's fine.
But that is the version that makes you feel the most apologetic, which kind of tells you what type of drama it is. Again, I am very grateful for F4 Thailand. I was not expecting this experience. I was determined to avoid this version when I'd heard about the announcement and the trailers came out. It was just halfway through, my Twitter feed was just full of people going completely insane. They were quoting, there were theses written in Twitter. Like, people were writing it in their notes and, like, posting it on Twitter. And I was reading tiny scripts on my phone screen. It was really bad on my eyes, but I was convinced. I was like, okay, fine, I have to try it now.
I met some very smart people through this show.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, I think that says a lot about the quality of the show, right? Is that it's inspired so much, deep and thoughtful and like really passionate analysis.
This is true.
Yeah,
for everything I wrote, there were people who came back to me and said, well, what about this? And I was like, that's also amazing. Let's also talk about that. There were just everyone was so eager to engage with it as deeply as they possibly could.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, thank you so much, Frabby, for joining us. This was delightful. I'm glad we got to have a Boys Over Flowers scholar.
It was so lovely to be here. Thank you.
And we are definitely going to link all of Frabby's amazing reviews of this drama. And also, definitely check out her other writing about, There's an amazing one about second leads that I highly recommend. And she writes about like older Japanese dramas that nobody talks about. I read your Buzzer Beat one and I was like, oh my God.
I love Buzzer
Does anyone
Beat.
other than,
Oh my
I
gosh.
remembered watching this back in the day. Yeah. So yeah, we should get together and talk about Japanese dramas.
Let's do it.
You,
Yeah.
Sometime.
You guys should please do that because that is an era that and genre that I know very little about, but like I have read some of your posts and do this. This is great. So yes, like I will help in
thank you,
whatever way I
guys.
can.
Yeah. So on that note, Frabby, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me at crabbyfordramas.wordpress.com, and I'm also on Twitter at FrabbyCrabsis, Drama Beans at FrabbyCrabsis, etc., etc. I'm fairly easy to find as long as you know my username.
So you can find us on the internet. We're on Twitter at Dramas Overflow. You can find me on Twitter at Anisa Khalifa _.
You can find me, Parma, at Festive Faster. You can find Dramas Over Flowers on Instagram at dramasoverflowers_. And you can email us at dramasoverflowers@gmail.com.
Yes, please tell us all your opinions about Boys Over Flowers Extended Universe.
Yes, please.
I'm sure everyone has a lot of thoughts. And you can find us on Facebook. Just search for Dramas Over Flowers. And our website, where you can find interesting blog posts and articles, is dramasoverflowers.net. We just posted an amazing guest post by our friend Anya de Jager about kissing. So go watch. I feel like that's all I need to say. It's not really, not really just about that, but you know. I know my audience.
Say no more. Okay,
exactly.
So Dramas Over Flowers is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you love at frolic.media/podcasts. You know, the last time Sai and I were doing this recording, Sai was supposed to say that line, but we didn't have the script in front of us, and Anisa is the one who usually makes sure we stick to the script. So instead of saying find more podcasts, she ended up saying find more dramas you love, and I was like, oh my God, you got it absolutely correct. And we just ended it right there.
But you know what's funny? I was listening to it yesterday and I didn't even notice that mistake.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And I was like, no, they did a good job. It was charming.
I think I heard that, and then I was like, oh, and then I just didn't think about it.
You forgave us. Thanks, Frabby. All right, well, thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.